Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a room beneath the Imperial Palace. You will never see it. Most people who have ever glimpsed it did not survive the experience. Not because of guards, not because of weapons, not because of some elaborate security protocol, but because the room itself is something the human body was simply never designed to be near. Picture a cavern 4 miles long and half a mile tall, not carved by nature, built by intention, deep under what was once the continent of Asia, under what was once a mountain range, under what was once the tallest point on Earth. Its walls are covered in mechanisms whose names have not existed in any living language for 5,000 years. Its ceiling disappears into a haze of alchemical fog that serves simultaneously as coolant, as concealment, and as a kind of structural element in its own right, but flowing around the components of the machine the way water flows around stone. The light inside shifts, not like a light source flickering, but like something fundamentally uncertain about what wavelength it wants to occupy, cycling through gold and amber and something else, something the human eye reports, but the human brain refuses to quite categorize. The air inside is not air in any sense you would find comfortable. It is saturated with radiation from machines operating in spectrums that the Adeptus Mechanicus has spent 10,000 years being unable to name. The concentration of psychic energy is, by any rational measurement, lethal. It is not the gentle spiritual warmth that psychers describe when they use their gifts in ordinary circumstances. It is a river, and you would be standing in it. And it would pull you apart the way a current pulls apart a paper boat. The psi fusion reactors that dot the perimeter pulse like mechanical hearts, their rhythm offset just enough from one another that the combined effect is a subtle wrongness, a pressure that the body feels without the mind consciously registering it, until the moment the mind starts to go. The smell, to those few who have experienced it and lived, is ozone and ancient metal and something sweet underneath. The sweetness of organic matter in long decay. The smell of something that has been dying very slowly for a very long time and has not finished yet. And at the center of all of it, atop a pyramid of churning apparatus, buried in stasis fields and surrounded by equipment that the tech priests maintaining it can operate but cannot understand, enshrouded by the fog and haloed by a light that does not quite come from any visible source, there sits the throne. And on the throne sits what was once a man. His face, in the rare accounts of those who have stood close enough to perceive it, is ageless in the way that geological formations are ageless. Not smooth, not young, ancient, worn by forces that time alone could not account for, the lines in it speaking not of years but of weight. His mouth is open. In the accounts, always open. In what the observer's mind wants to interpret as a scream, though no sound emerges. His eyes are closed, or appear to be closed, though the distinction between the emperor's eyes being closed and the emperor simply choosing not to direct his perception outward is a philosophical question that nobody currently alive can answer. The machines around him do not hum in the way that machines usually hum, steady and mechanical and ignorant of meaning. They hum in something closer to a chord. Multiple frequencies, multiple rhythms, the sound of a vast and incomprehensible system maintaining itself through routines that have drifted over millennia from their original calibration, each component compensating for the failures of others, the whole thing held together by accumulated workaround upon workaround, a 10,000-year improvisation that has never been allowed to stop. Welcome to the Golden Throne. I am Q, and tonight we are going somewhere most discussions of this subject never quite reach. Because here is the thing. The Golden Throne is one of the most discussed pieces of lore in all of Warhammer 40,000. Yet it comes up in every conversation about the Imperium's future. It is the backdrop of 1,000 fan theories. It is the engine that drives the central narrative tension of the setting, the dying god, the failing machine, the civilization standing on the edge of a cliff, It has been approaching for 10 millennia. Everyone knows the broad strokes. The Emperor sits on it. It is failing. 1,000 psychers die for it every day. Eventually, it will break, and then everything breaks with it. What people do not know, what most citizens of the Imperium themselves do not know, what many of the people who maintain the throne do not know, what even some of the people who could theoretically fix it do not fully know, is what it actually is. Where it came from, what it was built for, what it was never built for, what it has become, or what it is actually doing right now, and what it has been doing to the being sitting in it slowly over 10,000 years. The truth of the Golden Throne is not just a story about a machine failing. It is a story about a dream that became a trap, about the most ambitious plan in human history colliding with the worst moment in human history, about the ways in which love and betrayal and desperation and genius can combine to produce outcomes that nobody intended and nobody can undo. Let us start at the actual beginning. Section 1. A device found in the dark. Most people, when they think about the origin of the Golden Throne, assume it was built, that the Emperor, with all his extraordinary intellect and all the resources of the nascent Imperium, designed and constructed the thing that now serves as his eternal resting place. Oh, this is not what happened. Sometime in the 30th millennium, the exact date is lost, which itself tells you something about how deliberately this knowledge was suppressed. The Emperor found something buried in the deserts of Asia. The ruins that contained it were not human ruins. They were not Eldari ruins. They were old in a way that defied easy categorization, predating the recorded history of any civilization that the Emperor was aware of, which at that point in his 10,000-plus year life was a very extensive list. The object at the center of those ruins was a machine, a chair, or something shaped like a chair, made from an alloy of gold-colored metal that no subsequent analysis has been able to fully characterize. Yes, it was psychically reactive. It responded to and amplified psychic energy in ways that no human technology of any era could replicate. It was linked, through mechanisms that ran into the ground beneath it, to a pair of massive golden doors. And those doors opened, when correctly interfaced with, into somewhere else entirely, into the webway. The Emperor spent time studying it, working with it, attempting to understand both what it did and how it did it. His conclusion, reached over years of careful investigation, was that this device was a portal control mechanism, a system designed to create, maintain, and manage a stable entrance into the labyrinthine dimension, the space between spaces that the Eldari called the webway. The original webway had been built by the old ones, those ancient and now absent beings who had seeded intelligent life across the galaxy millions of years ago. The Eldari had inherited it, mastered it, extended it, built their entire civilization around it. And now, here was a device that could create a new entrance to it, built by unknown hands and left in the ground beneath the Asian deserts for an unknown length of time, for unknown reasons. The Emperor, as is his way, did not announce this discovery. He did not share it with the Mechanicum, or with his advisors, or with any of his sons, as they were found and brought into the fold. He folded the device into his plans quietly, secretly, with the long patience of a being who had been alive long enough to understand that the most important things are the ones that cannot be revealed before they are ready. There is a question that hovers over the throne's origins that the lore never answers definitively, and that I think deserves to be taken seriously, because the answer, or rather the range of possible answers, has direct implications for why the throne cannot be repaired. Who built it? The Dark Age of Technology explanation is the most conservative and the most officially supported. Humanity during that era was at its peak of scientific achievement, and its scientists were working in areas that later ages would find alarmingly esoteric: psychic amplification, dimensional access, devices that interface directly with the immaterium. It is not impossible that human scientists of the early millennia constructed a device for accessing the webway, testing it, and then lost it in the chaos of the age of strife that followed. But the dark age of technology explanation has weaknesses. The Emperor himself, reviewing his work on the device in a psychic conversation recorded in the novel Master of Mankind, essentially admits that he is not certain whether the design he was implementing was his own original thought, or whether the device itself, through some form of resonance with his psychic senses, was suggesting its own application. This is not how a human engineer describes working with human technology. This is how someone describes working with something alien, something that has its own purpose encoded into it, something that communicates through its very existence rather than through any readable documentation. The Eldari origin theory has some textual backing, but a line in Rise of the Inari describes the Emperor as a figure sustained by technology taken from the Eldari. The webway is an Eldari inheritance, even if it was originally an Old One's creation. A device for interfacing with the webway could have Eldari origins. Ancient Eldari, from the height of their empire, devices left behind as their civilization retreated and eventually fell. But the most compelling and the most disturbing theory goes further back than the Eldari. The webway was not created by the Eldari. It was created by the Old Ones, and the Eldari were its inheritors. A device built for accessing the webway at the deepest level, not just entering it, but creating new passages, doing things that even the modern Eldari cannot do with it, might predate the Eldari themselves. The golden, psychically responsive alloy from which the core of the throne is made does not resemble Eldari technology in any meaningful way. It does, if you look at it from a certain angle, share certain aesthetic and conceptual similarities with things associated with the Old Ones in the wider lore. The pyramid imagery, the golden color, the relationship to psychic power, and dimensional manipulation as inseparable concepts rather than separate disciplines. This is the theory I find most compelling, and I want to explain why. Because understanding it is crucial to understanding why the throne cannot be repaired. If the throne's core was built by the Old Ones, beings who manipulated the galaxy on timescales measured in millions of years, and whose understanding of the warp and real space and the dimensions between them was orders of magnitude beyond anything any subsequent civilization has achieved, then the gap between what the machine is and what anyone currently living understands about it is not a gap of missing documentation. It is a gap of fundamental cognitive reach. It is not that the blueprints were lost. It is that the blueprints would be incomprehensible to anyone who found them. The technology is not just old. It is categorically different in kind from anything humanity, or even the Eldari have since produced. And this is exactly what you see in the behavior of the throne. The Mechanicum cannot repair it, not because the repair manuals were lost, though those were lost too, or as they cannot repair it because they cannot understand what they are looking at well enough to know what needs repairing. They are, in the words of one particularly honest description I have encountered, performing rituals. Not engineering, rituals. Doing things that worked before without understanding why they worked, hoping the correlation between the ritual and the outcome holds, and knowing in their more honest moments that they cannot be certain it will. There is also a companion device found during the Great Crusade called Dark Glass. The Emperor encountered it on a distant world and set about restoring it with clear recognition. He knew it was of the same technological family as what he had found in the Asian deserts. He treated it as a test platform, even a related device that could be used to explore the technologies he was applying to what would become the Golden Throne. Dark Glass suggests that these devices were not singular. They were designed to work together, or at least to be complementary. What happened to Dark Glass and what it ultimately represents is a mystery that the lore has not yet resolved, but its existence reinforces the picture of the throne as one piece of a larger and far more ancient design whose full scope no one in the Imperium has ever grasped. Section 2. The Dream of the Webway Project. The Emperor's ambition, once he understood what the device in the desert could do, was breathtaking. To understand why, you need to understand what interstellar travel in the 41st millennium actually means in practice. As ships move between stars through the warp, the Imperium, the psychic shadow of reality, the dimension where the chaos gods live and where demons make their home. To travel through the warp, you need a navigator, a mutant human whose third eye can perceive the currents of the Imperium and chart a course through them. You need a Geller field, an arcane device that creates a bubble of real space around the ship, protecting it from the entities of the warp, who would otherwise tear it apart and consume its crew. You need the astronomican, the psychic beacon that the navigator uses as a fixed reference point. Without it, navigation becomes effectively impossible, a blind stumble through a lethal dimension with no landmarks. Even with all of this, warp travel is never truly safe. Geller fields can fail, navigation can go wrong, as ships dropping out of the warp in the wrong location, the wrong time, having experienced events that their instruments cannot account for. Warp storms can cut off entire sectors for years or centuries, isolating worlds from the rest of the Imperium completely. And every moment in the warp is a moment of exposure to entities that exist to consume human psychic energy, that are drawn to the heat of a human soul, the way sharks are drawn to blood in water. The Emperor found all of this unacceptable, not as a matter of pride or preference, but as a strategic reality. An Imperium that depends on the warp for its communications and logistics is an Imperium that chaos can strangle at will. Cut the shipping lanes with warp storms, disrupt the astronomican, compromise the navigators. And the most powerful human civilization in history becomes a collection of isolated, fragile, disconnected worlds, each facing extinction alone. The alternative was the webway, that ancient network of tunnels running through a third dimension, not real space and not the warp, but something in between, stable, traversable, free from the influence of chaos and the presence of demons. The Aeldari had used it for millions of years as the foundation of their civilization. Travel through the webway was near instantaneous. It required no psychic exposure, no navigators, no Geller fields. You went in one entrance and came out another, without any of the horrors of warp transit, without any of the risk. The Emperor's plan was to build a human extension of it, not to take over the Aeldari network. That was partly destroyed, partly still in use, and not something the Aeldari were going to share with anyone. But using the device he had found, now reconstructed into the apparatus beneath the Imperial Palace and known as the Golden Throne, the Emperor could hold open a portal into the actual webway. From that stable entry point, he was sending armies of Mechanicum workers into the webway itself, constructing new tunnels, built from human materials, but protected from warp intrusion by the Emperor's psychic will channeled through the throne. The new tunnels were not made from wraithbone or any of the psychically resistant materials the old ones had used to construct the original webway. They were made from human engineering, which meant they were fundamentally permeable to the warp without external protection. The Emperor was that protection. As long as he sat on the throne and maintained his concentration, his psychic will created a sheath around the new tunnels, preventing demons from breaking through the thin walls between the webway and the Imperium. This meant the Emperor could not leave the throne, not for more than the briefest periods. The concentration required was total. One moment of inattention, one distraction, and the new tunnels would begin to fail, the walls would begin to thin, and the entities of the warp would begin to push through. This was considered an acceptable sacrifice. Once the webway project was complete, once the human tunnels connected to the wider Aeldari network and provided stable, a safe passage between the worlds of the Imperium, the Emperor would be free. The throne would no longer be needed as a sustained interface. Someone else might sit on it and manage the completed system with a fraction of the effort. Magnus the Red, the Emperor's most gifted psyker, had privately begun to suspect that this was the role that had been planned for him, that the throne's psychic demands were calibrated to a Primarch's power level, that his father had designed this project with the intention that Magnus would eventually take over its management once the Great Crusade was complete and the Primarch's political functions were less critical. The Navis Nobilite, the Navigator houses, those ancient noble families whose mutant members hold a monopoly on warp navigation, were not told about this project. They could not be told, as the completed Imperial webway would have rendered them obsolete. Their monopoly on interstellar travel would have ended. Their political power, their wealth, their entire reason for being, gone. And they had enough influence that, if warned, they could have created obstacles serious enough to delay or derail the project entirely. The secrecy extended further. Even the Primarchs, even Rogel Dawn, who was charged with the defense of Terra itself, did not know what was happening in the tunnels beneath the Imperial Palace. They knew the Emperor was working on something. They did not know what. The deliberate exclusion of his sons from this knowledge was one of the grievances that would eventually be weaponized against the Emperor, a sign of the distance and secrecy that Horus and the Chaos powers would use to argue that the Emperor regarded his sons as tools rather than partners. The project advanced. Workers tunneled. Custodians and Sisters of Silence maintained blockades against the occasional intrusions that probed the edges of the Emperor's protection. Months became years. Years became decades. And slowly, carefully, the dream moved toward reality. There are accounts in the novel Master of Mankind of the Emperor on the throne during this period. Accounts from the perspective of custodians who could see their master at work. He appears as a figure of barely contained radiance, the machine channeling something vast through a body that, even then, was more than human. His eyes, when open, are described as containing something that is difficult to look at directly, not frightening, not alien, something that is the complete opposite of both those things. A clarity so total that it feels like looking into sunlight and seeing for a moment what sunlight is made of. The workers in the webway tunnels, moving through the impossible geography of the labyrinthine dimension with the Emperor's light protecting them, are described as feeling it like a warmth, a sense of being held, of moving in the presence of something fundamentally on their side. They died there eventually, many of them, when everything went wrong. But in the years before that, they worked in a space that no human being had occupied before or has occupied since, building the passages of a new kind of future, guided by the largest mind humanity has ever produced. That future was coming. It was genuinely coming. And then, Magnus the Red came home. Section 3. The Shattering of the Dream. Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Sons, the greatest psyker among the Emperor's sons, the scholar, the researcher, the being who had spent his life pursuing knowledge with a passion that bordered on obsession and occasionally crossed that border entirely. Magnus, meditating in his sanctum on Prospero, experienced visions of his beloved brother Horus, standing on the corrupted world of Davin, the dark light of chaos gathering around him, visions of what was to come, the betrayal, the war, the heresy. Magnus saw it with the clarity that came with his extraordinary gifts, and he felt what any son who loved his father would feel. He had to warn him. He had to tell him. There was no time. But he made a choice that was understandable and catastrophic. He gathered the psychic power of his entire legion, every sorcerer of the Thousand Sons, adding their strength to his. And he reached out through the warp to pierce the psychic shields around the Imperial Palace and deliver his warning directly. He was operating under the influence of an entity within the warp that offered to help him break through the barriers. That entity was Tzeentch, the architect of fate, the chaos god of change and manipulation, who had been maneuvering these pieces into exactly this position for centuries. Magnus punched through the shields. He delivered his warning. His spirit blazed into the Emperor's sanctum, into the deepest parts of the Imperial Palace, where the Webway project was underway. And in doing so, he did not merely break the psychic wards the Emperor had erected around the palace. He shattered the delicate interlocked system of protections that kept the new webway tunnels sealed against the warp. The wards around the Imperial Palace were not separate from the webway project. They were part of the same architecture. The Emperor's psychic concentration, channeled through the throne, created both the protection of the new tunnels and the outer defensive shields simultaneously. They were one system. Disrupting one disrupted the other, and disrupting it as thoroughly as Magnus did, with the amplified force of an entire legion of warp practitioners behind him, with the borrowed power of a chaos god that wanted exactly this outcome, was not a minor disruption. It was a catastrophic structural failure. Our rifts tore open in the new human-built tunnels. Connections between the webway and the open warp, which the Emperor had spent years carefully preventing, opened simultaneously across the entire length of the project. And through those rifts, as if they had been waiting, which they had been, the denizens of the warp are nothing if not patient, came demons. Thousands of Mechanicum workers were in those tunnels. They had been there for years, working steadily, believing themselves protected, feeling that warmth of the Emperor's presence around them. They had no warning. The change from protected space to breached warp-adjacent horror happened in moments, the walls of reality thinning and tearing before any defensive measure could be organized. They died in the dark between dimensions, overrun by things they could neither fight nor outrun nor comprehend, the sounds of their screaming lost in a space that had no atmosphere to carry sound, and no rules about what was possible. The custodians already in the tunnels responded with everything they had. These were the finest warriors alive, engineered beyond what any ordinary space marine could achieve, trained for exactly this kind of crisis. And even they were overwhelmed by the scale of it. They established blockades where they could, pulled survivors back from the worst affected sections, conducted counterattacks to keep the demonic tide from consolidating. The Sisters of Silence, whose very presence was anathema to psychic entities, threw themselves into the breaches. They held, barely. But the demons were kept from reaching the Golden Throne's physical portal, the massive golden doors that served as the actual entrance point, and therefore kept from pouring through into the Imperial Palace itself and overrunning terror. But the tunnels were lost. The workers were lost. The project was lost. And the Emperor could not leave the throne. This is the part that people miss. Before Magnus's act, the throne was a tool. The Emperor sat on it by choice, by purpose, concentrating his will to maintain a project he believed in. He could, in theory, have stepped away, had other appointments, managed the crusade differently. The throne was the location of his work, not his prison. After Magnus's act, everything changed. The demonic forces pressing against the webway breach were not going to go away on their own. The breach was not going to close itself. The only thing preventing terror from being overrun by a warp incursion of unprecedented scale was the Emperor's sustained psychic presence on the throne. Removing himself from the throne, even for a moment, risked everything. The dream was over. The project was ruined beyond any realistic hope of completion. The workers were dead. The tunnels were breached. The beautiful vision of a humanity free from the warp and the dependency on psychers and the constant threat of demonic incursion was ash. And the Emperor was trapped in the machine that had been supposed to make that vision real. He managed his confinement as well as anything could be managed. He gave what guidance he could to the prosecution of the war that followed, the Horus Heresy, which began shortly after Magnus's folly and drew every loyal asset the Emperor had into its catastrophic orbit. He directed when he could. He stayed on the throne because he had no choice. He communicated in the limited ways available to him, and he waited for the moment when the situation might be changed. The moment never came in the way he had imagined. Instead, it came in the form of Horus's fleet in orbit and the Siege of Terror. Section 4. The Siege and the Moment of Decision. The Siege of Terror lasted 55 days. This is the broad historical fact. What the daily experience of those 55 days was, for the defenders fighting on the walls of the Imperial Palace, for the billions of civilians caught in the bloodbath, for the Emperor on the throne, is something that the historical record captures only in fragments, because it was the kind of event that breaks the instruments designed to measure it. The traitor forces were enormous. They had drawn upon the resources of half the Space Marine legions, the corrupted elements of the Mechanicum, the tainted remnants of millions of Imperial Guard regiments, titans whose loyalty had been turned by the machinations of chaos. They had the active sponsorship of all four of the great ruinous powers, entities whose influence on the material world waxed and waned with the tide of battle in ways that the defenders could not predict or fully counter. Against them, the loyalists held what they could hold: the Imperial fists under Rogel Dawn, the Blood Angels under Sanguinius, who had received a vision of his own death and chose to stand anyway, the White Scars under Jagatai Khan, the Custodians, yet the Sisters of Silence, millions of ordinary human soldiers who had no superhuman nature to rely on, only courage and the knowledge that retreat was not an option. And below it all, beneath the burning palace in the dungeon, the Emperor held the door shut. When the moment came for the Emperor to decide to confront Horus directly, to leave the throne and go to the vengeful spirit, to end this by ending its architect, the choice he faced was not simple. It was not merely a tactical question about the best use of his abilities. It was a question of what he was willing to sacrifice and what he was willing to risk. Leaving the throne meant the webway breach would be unmanned. The barriers would hold for some time, but not indefinitely. Someone had to take his place. Malcador had known for years that this moment would come. The Emperor had told him, and he had agreed. Over those years of preparation, he had done everything he could to be ready, which was not very much, because no preparation can make a human being, even one as extraordinary as Malcador, ready for what the throne demands. Before Malcador ascended the throne, 1,000 psychers were gathered and sacrificed to power the throne without a rider for a single day. That day of autonomous function was the window. The Emperor rose. He looked at his friend, who would not survive this, and proclaimed him in that moment, Malcador the hero. The word hero carries a weight in this context that normal usage does not convey. He was not a hero because of something he had done. He was a hero because of what he was about to do, because of what he was willingly walking into. Malcador sat on the throne, as the accounts differ on what he experienced in the first moments. What is consistent across them is that it was immediately and catastrophically more than anything a human mind is built to endure. The Emperor had sat on this machine for years, and it had strained even him, a being of 10,000 years of accumulated psychic practice and a native power so vast that it redefined what psychic power meant. Malcador, for all his gifts, was working with a fraction of that capacity. He held on, for days. While the Emperor fought his way to Horus on the vengeful spirit, while Sanguinius died trying to stop the War Master alone, while the greatest combat in the history of the galaxy played out in the corridors and chambers of a corruption-soaked starship in orbit above a burning world, Malcador sat in the chair and held the door shut. Had he aged visibly? His body, already ancient beyond what any ordinary human lifespan would produce, broke down at an accelerating rate, the throne consuming the very substance of him to maintain its function. His extraordinary reserves of psychic power, built across more than 6,000 years of living, burned through in days. The Emperor was nearly killed. Horus, empowered by all four chaos gods simultaneously, transformed into something that had once been a Primarch, but was now something else, something designed specifically to be the death of the Emperor, came closer than any being had ever come. He was crippled, broken in ways that went beyond the physical. Rogel Dawn found his father and carried him home. They descended to the Imperial dungeon and found Malcador still on the throne, barely there. Our psychic energy was crackling across a body that had been almost entirely consumed by the effort. The man who had been the most important advisor in human history, who had built the Inquisition and shaped the Assassinorum and guided the Imperium while the Emperor was occupied with other things for decades at a stretch, he was nearly dust. The tech priests made the exchange. as carefully as haste allowed. They detached Malcador from the throne and moved to connect the Emperor. As Malcador was removed, the last thread of his life went with it. He gave, in his final moment, whatever was left to the Emperor, a last gift of psychic energy, buying the borrowed moments needed for the Emperor to wake briefly, to speak his last instructions, to give the orders that would allow the Imperium to survive his incapacitation. While Malcador the hero turned to dust when the machines let go of him, the Imperium names tanks after him. The Emperor's last spoken instructions were practical, grim, and focused on the survival of humanity rather than on his own situation. He knew what was happening. He knew the modifications that would be made to the throne. He knew what it meant. He chose this, in the sense that he told Rogel Dawn what to do, knowing what he was agreeing to. Dawn stood over the Mechanicum tech priests and demanded they make it work. And they did, after a fashion. They modified the throne with desperate ingenuity, adding systems it had never been designed to include: biomechanical interfaces, enhanced stasis fields, mechanisms for processing and distributing the energy of psychosacrifices that had been improvised at Malcador's suggestion during the years before the heresy, as a way to reduce the burden on the Emperor during the Webway project. Was it good engineering? No. It was good enough engineering under impossible circumstances, which is a very different thing. The modifications kept the Emperor's body from complete biological failure. They kept his mind anchored to reality. They kept the astronomican functioning. And they created the situation that would persist for the next 10,000 years. Section 5. The astronomican and the cost. Let us talk about the psychosacrifice, because I think it is one of those things that people know about, without really letting themselves understand what it means at scale. 1,000 psychers per day. And that is the figure most commonly cited for the daily cost of maintaining the Emperor on the throne and keeping the astronomican operational. 10,000 psychers are connected to the systems of the throne and the astronomican's apparatus at any given time, feeding their psychic energy into the machine, burning out and dying at the rate of 1,000 per day and being replaced by the next wave. These are not volunteers in any meaningful sense of the word, though the Imperium's mythology frames them as martyrs who have chosen a sacred death. They are psychers, collected from across the Imperium by the black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, human beings identified as having psychic gifts, taken from their worlds and transported to Terra, processed through the systems of the Adeptus Astronomica, and eventually connected to the throne to burn. The majority of them are not consulted about their preferences. The majority of them are simply taken, assessed, trained briefly if they survive long enough, and used. The human cost over 10,000 years is staggering in a way that requires a moment to actually sit with. 1,000 per day, 365,000 per year, 3.5 billion over the full duration of the Emperor's internment. 3.5 billion human lives, burned, used as fuel. This is the foundation of the Imperium of man, not in the metaphorical sense in which great civilizations are said to be built on the suffering of the many, in the literal, mechanical, technical sense. Remove those lives from the equation and the astronomican goes dark. Yet remove the astronomican and warp navigation becomes effectively impossible. Remove warp navigation and the Imperium ceases to be an interstellar civilization overnight. It becomes a scattering of isolated worlds, each facing alone whatever threatens them, with no way to call for help and no way for help to find them. Every ship that has navigated the warp in the last 10,000 years owes something to those 3.5 billion souls. Every world that has received supplies or reinforcements or medical aid or political guidance from Terra owes something to them. Every Space Marine chapter whose existence depends on the supply lines that connect gene seed forges and ammunition depots and recruiting worlds owes something to them. The Imperium is built on them, literally, and almost none of its citizens know their names or their faces or the worlds they came from. The number is not stable. By the end of the 36th millennium, roughly 4,000 years into the Emperor's internment, the demand began to increase. The throne was degrading, its efficiency declining, requiring more input to produce the same output. By the 41st millennium, the demand had quadrupled. 4,000 psychers per day, not one. 14.5 million per year. The black ships could barely keep up, and the Emperor had never wanted this to happen at all. When Malcador originally suggested using psyker sacrifice to supplement the throne's power requirements during the Webway project, the Emperor agreed only reluctantly and with explicit conditions. This was to be temporary, but it would stop when the Webway project was complete. He had no intention, he made clear, of feeding on human lives as a routine function of his existence. He has been doing it for 10,000 years. The Webway project is a ruin. The intention died with it. The people who keep the astronomican functioning, the chosen, the specially trained psychers who are connected to the device and burn themselves out in the process, are given something approaching education and context. They know why they are there. They know what their sacrifice means. Whether knowing makes it better or worse is a question that tends not to come up in Imperial theology. The broader psyker population that feeds the throne directly receives less preparation. The black ships deliver them to systems that process them with mechanical efficiency. They are assessed, sorted, then moved through stages of preparation, and eventually connected. The machine takes what it needs. They cease. This is happening right now in real time, within the fiction. Every moment we spend discussing this subject, within the world of 40K, more psychers are burning. The throne is feeding. The astronomican is shining. Somewhere in the warp, a navigator is using it to orient a ship that carries 2,000 soldiers toward a world that desperately needs them. The math connects. The cost is paid. Section 6. 10,000 years in a broken machine. What has the Emperor been doing for 10,000 years? Not sleeping, not resting, not in any state that could meaningfully be described as comfortable or peaceful. His mind, the most powerful human psychic mind that has ever existed, remains fully active even as his body fails, as it moves through the warp in ways that no ordinary consciousness can manage or survive, engaged in work that the most heavily augmented and best informed people in the Imperium can only partially perceive. The astronomican functions because the Emperor focuses his attention on it, shaping the raw psychic energy of the sacrificed psychers into the directed, navigable beacon that the navigators use. This is not passive. It requires continuous calibration. The warp shifts, the currents change, the signal needs constant adjustment to remain usable. 10,000 years of this, every day, every hour. The webway breach beneath the Imperial Palace remains sealed. The demonic forces that have been pressing against it since the time of Magnus's folly have not broken through. The Emperor holds the seal. This is also not passive, but think of it as a door that demons are constantly pushing against, and the only reason it stays shut is that someone is constantly pushing back. The Emperor has been pushing back for 10,000 years. He is said to engage in something like battle with the chaos gods in the warp. The four great ruinous powers, Horn, Tziench, Nurgle, Slanesh, have not been ignoring the Emperor.
Okay, I want to stop here for a second because this is the part of the lore where I always have to put the notes down and just sit with it. Because everything we have talked about so far, the device in the desert, the dream of the webway, the moment Magnus shattered it, none of that is presented in the lore as the result of malice. It is the result of love. Magnus loved his father. He wanted to warn him. And that's it. That is the thing that broke 10,000 years of human history. Not a villain. A son who cared too much and understood too little. And I find that genuinely more disturbing than any of the demonic horrors this setting throws at you. Because it feels human. It feels like something that could happen. The most catastrophic event in the history of the species, caused by exactly the kind of impulse we are all capable of. And that is what this lore does to me every time I come back to it. It does not just scare me, it makes me feel something. But anyways, that's just my 2 cents. Let's go back to the video.
An entity of his psychic magnitude, locked in place but fully awake and fully aware, is too significant to ignore. He is called the anathema by the forces of chaos, the thing that is the opposite of what they are, the obstacle, the enemy. The battles in the warp are invisible to mortals, but are consistently described as real, ongoing, and consequential. Events in the material universe that appear to be miraculous, ships surviving impossible odds, daemons being struck down at critical moments, individual psychers receiving visions that prove accurate, can be read as the fingerprints of these battles. He guides the Emperor's tarot. He soul-binds astropaths. He does things in the warp that the Imperium benefits from without knowing the source. But here is the question that sits under all of this and gets asked less often than it deserves. Is there still a person in there? The Emperor as a person, as the being who had plans, who had a vision of what humanity could become, who felt something about the suns he created and the civilization he built. Is that person still present? Or has 10,000 years of this existence, of psychic labor beyond anything a human mind was ever built to endure, of the throne's mechanical demands, consuming and reshaping the very structure of his consciousness, produce something that is no longer the Emperor in any meaningful sense? The Sister Carrier account in Master of Mankind is the most direct description we have of what the Emperor looks and feels like in the 30th millennium, during the war in the webway. She sees a figure of power on the throne, yes. She also sees something that stops her. She expects, because everything about the Imperium she serves has prepared her to expect it, to see something divine. What she sees instead, in the unmediated truth of his face, is pain, not godly serenity, not cosmic authority. A man in extraordinary pain, bearing something that would have killed anything less. That was 10,000 years ago. What 10,000 years of that has produced, what remains of the person, the consciousness, the intention, may be the most important and most unanswerable question in the entire setting. There are signs. The return of Guilliman was accompanied by what some described as the Emperor's hand in events, small interventions that bent probability in the direction of his son's survival. Guilliman himself, after being resurrected from his millennia-long death sleep, had a communion with his father that left him visibly affected. He does not speak of it directly, but whatever he learned or felt in that moment contributed to his decision to continue leading the Indomitus Crusade, rather than succumbing to the despair that greeted him when he woke to the state of the Imperium. What can a mind do, trapped in a failing machine, as after 10,000 years of unimaginable psychic labor? What can it plan? What can it choose? What can it intend? These questions may or may not have answers. The law, characteristically, keeps them open, deliberately, purposefully, frustratingly open. The tension of the Golden Throne as a narrative engine depends on the answer remaining unknown. Section 7. The machine that cannot be fixed. In the early years of the 41st millennium, more than 10,000 years into the Emperor's internment, the tech priests who maintain the Golden Throne discovered something they had been both expecting and dreading. Failures. Not the gradual degradation they had been managing for millennia, the slow decline in efficiency, the increasing psycho demand, the components that needed more frequent replacement. Failures. Fundamental, categorical failures in mechanisms that they could not repair because they did not understand them well enough to know what repair would mean. The golden alloy of the throne's core does not respond to any known metallurgical technique. It cannot be welded, soldered, reforged, or replaced with anything that behaves the same way. The psychic circuitry, and that is the best description available, though it is not really a description of anything, just words arranged in the shape of one, operates on principles that no tech priest has ever been able to reverse engineer. They can observe its function. They cannot understand its mechanism. And when part of it stops functioning, they cannot restore what has been lost. No blueprints of the original device survive. This is not merely a matter of lost documentation. Even if complete records of the pre-human construction had been preserved, It is unclear whether any human mind could read them. The Mechanicum modifications made at the end of the heresy were documented in the usual fashion, but the documentation has been passed down through 10,000 years of copying and ritual formalization until it represents something more like a prayer than a technical manual. Following the ritual produces results. Whether the results are the intended results is not always something anyone can check. The tech priests who maintain the throne are not engineers in any meaningful sense. They are custodians of a tradition they do not fully understand, performing acts whose connection to the machine's function is sometimes causal and sometimes coincidental, and sometimes nobody is entirely sure which. But they replace parts they can recognize. They perform calibrations that seem to correlate with improved function. They pray, in the Mechanicum fashion, to the machine spirit they believe inhabits the throne, asking it to continue working. This is the most important piece of infrastructure in the Imperium of Man, and the people responsible for it are essentially doing cargo cult engineering. When the failures in the 41st millennium were found, the knowledge was suppressed, as such knowledge always is. But it did not stay suppressed entirely. Among the High Lords of Terror, the 12 individuals who govern the Imperium in the Emperor's stead, the information circulated at the highest levels, carried in encrypted files and whispered conversations in secured rooms, producing a quiet and sustained panic that the ordinary business of imperial governance proceeded to mask. The plan to bring a dark Eldar homunculus to Terra emerged from this panic. I want to emphasize how extraordinary this was. The Imperium that burns psychers in the streets of hive cities for the crime of being born with psychic gifts. The Imperium that wages perpetual crusades against alien life forms under the banner of human supremacy. This Imperium, at its highest levels, desperate enough to consider bringing one of the most feared and morally reprehensible entities in the galaxy, a dark Eldar torturer artist whose mastery of biological manipulation is built on the suffering of untold billions, into the sanctum of its most sacred object. The conspirators were not heretics by temperament. They were pragmatists who had looked at the alternative, the throne failing, the astronomican going dark, Terra overrun by the demons waiting in the webway breach, and concluded that no option was too extreme if it forestalled that outcome by even a few centuries. The homunculus was smuggled to Terra. It penetrated the outer defenses through a combination of deception and the cooperation of the 3 High Lords involved in the conspiracy. And almost immediately, it began pursuing its own agenda, disappearing into the vast subterranean complexity of the Imperial Palace, conducting experiments on whatever it found there, leaving a trail of grotesque kills and biological nightmares. It was eventually tracked down and destroyed by Inquisitor Erasmus Crowell and a custodian named Navradaran, who had been investigating the conspiracy from the other side. The conspiracy was broken. The homunculus was dead. The conspirators were shattered. But a subsequent expedition, less direct, more carefully managed, undertaken by tech priests and inquisitors rather than smuggled aliens, eventually reached Komorrah itself. They bargained with the Drukhari in the city of perpetual night, trading things that the Drukhari wanted for information and assistance related to the throne's failing mechanisms. Inquisitor Kroll, who later investigated these events, reported that the deal bought perhaps a few centuries of additional function. Not a solution, a delay, a significant delay, measured in human terms. Measured in throne terms, nothing. The throne is still failing. Section 8. Desperate Measures and the Quest for Answers. Shield Captain Heraclast Vadrian is not a name that most people know, but he is doing something that may be the most important thing currently happening in the Imperium. In the early years of the Indomitus Crusade, following the formation of the Great Rift and the return of Guilliman, Vadrian petitioned the Captain General of the Custodians, Trajan Valoris, for permission to pursue a lead. In the archives of the Imperial Palace, buried under 10,000 years of accumulated documentation, Vadrian had found a thread, the lost forge world of Morvain, a forge world that had specialized before its loss in exactly the category of arcane, pre-imperial archaeotech that the Golden Throne represents. The key word is lost. Morvain is gone. not destroyed in any documented engagement, are simply lost, no longer accessible, its location uncertain, its fate unknown. Forge worlds do not simply vanish. Their disappearance implies something happened to them, and something happening to a forge world implies something with enough power and motivation to act against one of the Mechanicum's most important installations. Vadrian gathered a shield company of his finest warriors, requisitioned a ship called the Scion of Argo, and departed. As of the current law, he has not returned. His ship has been spotted in various corners of the galaxy, suggesting he is still searching. Whether he has found Morvain, whether Morvain has anything useful in it, whether he will ever come back, these questions remain open. It is one of the most characteristically 40K situations possible. A potentially universe-saving quest are undertaken by an exceptional individual, vanishing into the grinding chaos of the galaxy with no confirmation of outcome. Belisarius Cawl is a more present figure, the Archmagos Dominus who secretly spent 10,000 years following Guilliman's last orders to build the Primaris Space Marines. Cawl is, by several reasonable estimates, the most technically capable living human. He has accumulated knowledge across a span that makes him barely comprehensible as a single continuous entity. He began as a normal, exceptionally intelligent tech priest, and has become something that has 10,000 years of memory and the processing capacity to make use of it. Cawl has implied, in the oblique way that Cawl implies things, that he possesses the knowledge necessary to repair or replace the Golden Throne. Or whether this is accurate self-assessment or grandiose self-promotion is unclear. Cawl's intelligence is not in question. His judgment about his own limitations has sometimes been overly optimistic. What is clear is that, even if Cawl has the knowledge and the capability, using it faces barriers that have nothing to do with engineering or intelligence. The Golden Throne is the most sacred object in the Imperial faith. For millions of priests and billions of ordinary believers, it is not a machine. It is the resting place of God. The ecclesiastical apparatus of the Imperium, the Ministorum, the various orders, the confessors and preachers who maintain the faith across a million worlds, does not have a policy position on how one goes about engineering modifications to the Emperor's divine throne. What the closest analogy that exists in human religious history would be proposing to dismantle the Kaaba for renovation, or suggesting that the Vatican Basilica needs its foundation replaced, except that the believers in this case are armed and spread across the galaxy and have access to orbital weapons platforms and space marine chapters. Political barriers are not always distinguishable from logistical ones in the Imperium. A proposal to modify the throne would generate opposition from multiple High Lords simultaneously for different reasons, with different factional alignments, and managing that opposition while actually conducting the work would require coordination that the Imperium's governance structure is not designed to provide. And underneath all of that is the technical reality. As the original device, the pre-human artifact found in the desert is built from technology that may simply exceed the comprehension of anyone currently alive. Cawl is brilliant. He is possibly the most capable human engineer in the galaxy, but the core of the Golden Throne was not built by a human. Working with it, understanding it, knowing which components need replacing and what they should be replaced with, this requires understanding the original design intent of whoever built it. And that designer is not available. That knowledge does not exist in any archive that anyone has found. The only being who might have the native understanding to guide such a repair is the one sitting in the machine and unable to communicate. Section 9. The Star Child and the Question of Rebirth. In the Shadows of the Imperium. Among the forbidden sects and suppressed heresies and deliberately persecuted philosophical traditions, there is a theory that has survived 10,000 years of attempted extermination. It is called, depending on which version you encounter, the Star Child theory, or the New Man theory, or simply the rebirth. It goes like this. The Emperor is a perpetual. This is law that has been established across multiple sources. One of that rare category of human beings whose soul is not destroyed at death, but instead reconstructed in the warp and reborn in a new body. The Emperor has been doing this since before recorded history. He has died and been reborn countless times, each life adding to the accumulated experience of the soul, which retains its pattern across each death and rebirth. This is why he has access to memories that span tens of thousands of years. This is why his power has grown across lifetimes in ways that no single mortal existence could account for. Before his first life as the Emperor specifically, the myth holds that he was the collective reincarnation of all the great shamans and spiritual guides who led early humanity through its first encounters with psychic ability. Those shamans, when they died, chose not to scatter into the warp and be consumed or reincarnated individually. They pooled their essence and were reborn as a single, unified consciousness. The Emperor, the new man, the first and greatest of what humanity's psychic future looks like. The Golden Throne does not allow this process to function normally. The Emperor cannot die in any meaningful sense because the machine will not let him die. It sustains the body against biological failure, holds the consciousness in place, prevents the natural conclusion of life and the rebirth that would follow. He is caught between states, not alive in the way a living person is alive, not dead in the way a perpetual dies and is reborn. Somewhere in between, held there by a machine that was never designed to hold him there, consuming him slowly. The Star Child theory suggests that something is happening despite the machine's interference, that the parts of the Emperor's psyche that have been slowly burned away by the throne's demands, the human parts, the personal parts, plus the memories and feelings and individual connections that make a person who they are rather than merely what they are not simply gone. They are coalescing somewhere in the warp, accumulating, forming something new. When the Emperor finally reaches whatever ending is approaching, when the throne fails completely, or when he chooses to release himself, or when some event that nobody has yet predicted tips the balance, what comes after might not be simply an absence. It might be a birth, a new entity forged from 10,000 years of suffering and purpose and the distilled psychic essence of the greatest human mind that ever existed, might emerge into a warp that has been shaped by those 10,000 years of the Emperor's presence and resistance. This entity, the Star Child, the Newman, as the Sensei Emperor, would be something different from what the Emperor was. Not a warlord with a plan, something more purely psychic, more purely what the shamans before him were, capable of confronting the chaos gods in dimensions and ways that the Emperor, shackled to a failing body, cannot. There are sects within the Imperium who believe this and who act on the belief. They are called Sensei Hunters by their enemies, or Illuminati by those more sympathetically inclined toward their goals. They seek out the Sensei, the children of the Emperor, conceived in past lives when he moved through the world as a mortal, and they protect them, believing that the Sensei's souls will be consumed to birth the Star Child at the moment of the Emperor's death. That this act of willing sacrifice is what transforms the Emperor's death from a catastrophe into a transfiguration. The Inquisition regards these sects as heretical and hunts them. The belief that the Emperor's death might be desirable or even survivable as an event is not one that imperial governance wants circulating in the broader population, but the theory persists. It has persisted for 10,000 years. There is also the hint, spread across the lore in small fragments, that the Emperor himself may be aware of some version of this trajectory, that his silence is not simply the silence of a mind overwhelmed with other work, but the silence of a consciousness that is choosing, very deliberately, not to act prematurely. That what looks like imprisonment may, from the inside, be something more like waiting, waiting for a moment that is not yet, waiting for conditions that have not yet been met. The custodian who stopped Cypher's famous run toward the throne room, Cypher, the Dark Angel's warrior whose identity and purpose remain one of the great mysteries of the setting, who carries an unfired bolt pistol widely believed to be a weapon capable of freeing the Emperor or ending his suffering, did not say stop, did not say never, did not say this is impossible or forbidden or meaningless. He said, "Not yet, not yet." Section 10. What it all actually means. I want to take a step back from the lore and talk about what the Golden Throne represents, because I think there is a way of holding all of this that gets missed in the usual discussion. The Golden Throne is not just a piece of failing technology. It is not just a plot device. It is not just the ticking clock that gives the Imperium of man its characteristic sense of doomed grandeur. It is all of those things, but underneath all of them, it is a story about how tragedy compounds. Consider the sequence of events that produced the situation in the 41st millennium. A being of extraordinary intelligence and extraordinary longevity, who had devoted tens of thousands of years to the protection and advancement of humanity, had a plan, a genuinely good plan, or as close to a genuinely good plan as anything gets in the 40,000 universe, where the difference between good and terrible is often a matter of degree rather than kind. He wanted to free humanity from its dependency on the warp. He wanted to make it possible for the species to grow and flourish and eventually become what he believed it was capable of becoming, but without the constant interference of entities that fed on human suffering and grew stronger with every act of fear and faith and violence. He had found a device that could help him do this. He had begun using it. He was making progress. And he kept the project secret because he understood that too many people knowing about it was a vulnerability, that the forces of chaos would act against it if they knew, and that keeping it secret meant keeping it safer. What he did not account for fully, and perhaps could not account for, being the kind of planner who understood threats he could see and sometimes failed to be humble enough about the threats he could not, was that his secrecy came at a cost. His sons did not know what he was doing or why he was staying on Terra. They felt abandoned. Or they felt that the project was proof that he valued the crusade more than he valued them. The Chaos Powers, who are very good at finding the grievances in any situation and weaponizing them, used this. They arranged for Magnus, the son who loved his father most completely and expressed that love most disastrously, to make an act of love that destroyed the project. Magnus was not malicious. He was not a traitor at the moment he broke the webway barriers. He was a son trying to warn his father about a threat, making a catastrophic error of judgment, manipulated by a chaos god who knew exactly what the consequences would be. The consequence was that the Emperor became trapped, not because he chose to be trapped, not because of any failure of wisdom or foresight on his part, because one of the things he loved, acting out of love, broke the thing he was trying to build. And from that trap, the Horus heresy followed, and from the heresy, the siege, and from the siege, the internment in the modified throne. One thing following from another, each step compelled by the previous one, the original purpose of the dream, to free humanity, becoming steadily more remote as the machine meant to achieve that freedom became a prison. There is something Malcador understood at the very end, sitting on the throne in his final hours. He described it in the fragmentary accounts of his dying moments as a parasite, not a machine designed to support its occupant, a machine designed to consume, to take the psychic energy of whoever sits in it and use that energy to maintain its functions, regardless of the cost to the occupant. The Emperor, and as a perpetual and the most powerful psyker who ever lived, could sustain this drain longer than anyone else could, but he could not sustain it indefinitely. The machine was eating him, has been eating him, has been consuming the very substance of what he was, piece by piece, for 10,000 years. What remains may be enough to hold the barrier, enough to light the astronomican, enough to wage the invisible wars in the warp that nobody knows about but everybody depends on. Whether it is enough to be the Emperor, to be the man who had plans and reasons and intentions, is the question that nobody can answer. The Imperium was built on a dream that was destroyed before it could be realized, modified to run on the ruined foundation of what was supposed to be a temporary measure, as sustained by the burning of billions of lives in a ritual that was meant to be brief and is now approaching the end of its borrowed time. Every ship that sails the warp owes its course to a being who never wanted this. Every prayer offered to the Golden Throne reaches something that was supposed to have been free a very long time ago. This is the truth of the Golden Throne. Not just that it is failing, that it was always, from the moment it became a life support machine rather than a webway interface, a compromise, an improvised response to a catastrophe maintained by people who don't fully understand it, powered by a supply of lives that was never supposed to be a supply, holding a dream that died before the person who dreamed it did. Section 11. Where we are now, and where we are going. In the era of the Dark Imperium, the period following the formation of the Great Rift and the beginning of the Indomitus Crusade, the situation around the Golden Throne is more urgent than it has ever been. The Great Rift itself is a relevant factor. This vast tear in the fabric of reality, running nearly the full length of the galaxy, splitting the Imperium roughly in half, is not just a military and logistical problem for the factions of the setting. It is a psychic phenomenon of enormous magnitude, a wound in real space through which the warp bleeds continuously. This has effects on the astronomican's range and reliability. Worlds in the Imperium Nihilus, the half of the galaxy on the far side of the rift from Terra, receive the astronomican's signal weakly or not at all. Navigation is improvised, desperate, as running on local beacons and partially charted routes and a great deal of faith. This means that the throne, already failing before the rift formed, is now being asked to project the astronomican through conditions more hostile than any it has previously faced. The demand is not decreasing. Robert Guilliman knows the throne is failing. He does not speak of this publicly, because what he knows, and what he can say to the population of 1 trillion worlds without causing immediate catastrophic panic, are two very different things. He knows the clock is running. He knows he cannot fix the mechanism. He pushes forward with the Indomitus Crusade because it is what he can do: restore order, reinforce worlds that have lost contact with the wider Imperium, maintain the civilization that the throne is still, barely, keeping alive. Gilliman's relationship to the Emperor in this era is one of the most poignant threads in the current lore. He came back from 10,000 years of death to an Imperium that horrified him. The superstition, the brutality, the bureaucratic calcification of everything his father and he had built. He described it, in a moment of anguish recorded by his aides, as a grotesque parody of what they had dreamed. He wept for it. And then he got back to work, because Guilliman is the Primarch who understands, more than any of his brothers did, that grief is not a reason to stop. But he cannot fix the throne. Whatever knowledge he has, whatever authority he wields as Lord Commander of the Imperium, the throne remains beyond his reach, too sacred to modify, too complex to understand, and too fundamental to risk, without certainty of outcome that no one can provide. Shield Captain Vadrian searches. Call hints at solutions he is not permitted to implement. The custodians range further from Terra than they ever have, operating across the galaxy, hunting the threats that might otherwise grow into existential crises. Whether this represents confidence that the situation at home is stable, or whether it represents the beginning of a strategy that assumes the throne's failure and attempts to build structures that could survive it, is not something the lore has made clear. The psychers continue to burn. The throne continues to fail. And in the room beneath the Imperial Palace, that vast cavern of heat and radiation and alchemical fog and mechanisms that no one understands, that 4-mile-long space that would kill most visitors within minutes, something sits in silence and holds on, holds the barrier shut, lights the beacon, wages the invisible wars, endures. How much longer can it endure? The Mechanicum's internal estimates are classified at levels that effectively remove them from the accessible record. The most honest answer currently available is that nobody knows. The degradation continues. The margin narrows. The clock that has been running for 10,000 years is still running, and nobody knows how much time is left on it. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, this is what the war is being fought to protect. Not a throne, not a tradition, Not even an emperor, not exactly. A compromise, a desperate improvisation. Yet a machine that was never supposed to be doing what it is doing, that cannot be repaired by anyone currently alive, that is consuming the last resources of the greatest mind humanity ever produced. And holding on. Just holding on. The room beneath the Imperial Palace has been there for more than 10,000 years. The machine has been running for more than 10,000 years. The sacrifice has been ongoing for more than 10,000 years. And the question that defines the setting, the one that everything from the grimdark aesthetics to the tragic character arcs to the perpetual impossibility of true victory, is in service of, can it hold on long enough for something to change? That question has not been answered. Maybe it can. Maybe Vadrian finds what he's looking for on Morvain. Maybe Cor gets his chance and his estimate of his own abilities is accurate. Maybe the Emperor's silence is intention and not yet means something specific. Maybe the Star Child is real, and the end of the throne is not the catastrophe everyone fears, but the beginning of something that could not have been built any other way. Maybe not. Maybe the throne fails. Maybe the astronomican goes dark. Maybe the breach opens. Maybe 10,000 years of endurance was enough to bring humanity to the brink of something better, and the brink is as far as it gets. The setting does not answer this. It keeps the question alive, the tension alive, the hope alive alongside the horror. That is what the Golden Throne is, in the end. It is the thing the story cannot afford to resolve, the question that keeps everything else moving. And that is the truth of the Golden Throne. The full truth, as much as it can be held in one sitting. If you made it here, thank you. Genuinely. This is the kind of content I make this channel for. The long, slow journey into lore that deserves more than a quick summary, told the way I wish someone had told it to me the first time I found this universe. If this video gave you something, a new angle on a corner of the lore you thought you already knew, a thread you want to pull further, or just the company of a long and quiet conversation with the lights low, hit the like button. It is the simplest thing you can do, and it genuinely matters more than you might think for getting these videos in front of the people who would want to watch them. Subscribe if you want to come back. Q on 40K is here for exactly this. Slow, atmospheric, or deep dives into the corners and the depths. There is so much more to cover. The nature of the warp and what it is doing to the galaxy right now. The chaos gods and the specific horror of each of them. The Necrons waking in their millions and what the Silent King's return actually means. The Tyranids and the terrifying intelligence behind the seemingly mindless hunger. The Aeldari and their relationship to their own extinction. The darkness of this setting is not decorative. It has layers. And most of the most interesting layers are the ones that people walk past because they seem too familiar. Come back. We will go deeper. Take care of yourselves out there. Section 12. The Physical Reality of the Throne Room, Extended. Let me return to the beginning of this story, because I want to spend more time there. I think the physical reality of the throne and its environment is something that gets abstracted away too quickly, turned into a symbol before its actual nature has been fully absorbed. The chamber that houses the Golden Throne is a place that humanity built around something that was not built for humanity. The Imperial Dungeon, as the space was called in the era of the Webway project, was the Emperor's primary laboratory complex, a subterranean city of interconnected research spaces, storage vaults, and working areas that filled the underground of what would eventually become the Imperial Palace. It was built to house the project. When the project failed and the throne was repurposed, the dungeon did not disappear. It was modified, expanded, and slowly transformed into something that now has almost no relationship to its original purpose. The throne room itself is almost incomprehensible in scale, 4 miles long, half a mile tall. These numbers do not communicate what that means experientially. Imagine the largest sporting arena you have ever been in, and then imagine stretching it 4 miles in one direction. The floor is stone, but you cannot see most of the floor because the throne's support systems occupy vast sections of it. Towers of machinery rising from the ground, clusters of equipment whose purpose is speculative even to the tech priests who tend them. are forests of cables and conduits running between devices in patterns that have been modified over 10,000 years to the point where no one is certain which connections are load-bearing and which are legacy infrastructure from functions that no longer exist. The throne itself, the golden throne proper, sits at the far end of this space, elevated on what can only be described as a constructed mountain, not a natural mountain, a pyramid of accumulated machinery built up over millennia as new components were added and old ones were incorporated rather than removed. You approach it like you would approach a volcanic peak. From a distance, it is simply large. As you get closer, the scale becomes progressively more disorienting. What appeared to be a surface feature from far away reveals itself to be an entire secondary structure. What appeared to be a minor protrusion is a machine the size of a small building. And at the apex of all of it, surrounded by the stasis fields and psi-fusion reactors and all the other apparatus of maintenance and function, the throne itself. The alchemical fogs that fill the room serve several functions simultaneously. They are coolant for the machines that generate extraordinary heat. They are concealment for the most vulnerable components of the system. And they are a kind of structural element, a medium through which certain aspects of the throne's psychic operation propagate in ways that the ambient atmosphere alone would not support. The fog is not passive. It is, in a sense, part of the machine. The guardians in this space are the Adeptus Custodes. They are present always. The chamber is never unguarded, not for a moment in 10,000 years. The 10,000, the most elite warriors in the Imperium, engineered to a standard beyond even the Primaris Space Marines, trained since childhood in a regimen that makes the Space Marine recruitment process look comparatively gentle. Many of them stand vigil here. They are not here to fight any enemy that can currently be imagined. They are here to fight any enemy that might be imagined in the future, and a few that cannot yet be imagined at all. The tech priests move through the space in their constant maintenance cycles, their mechadendrites reaching into systems they cannot fully understand. Their ritual incantations addressed to machine spirits they are trained to believe in because the alternative, the possibility that the machines respond to the rituals not because of any spiritual relationship, but because the ritual actions happen to produce the right mechanical interventions by coincidence, is a psychological burden the Mechanicum has not found a way to productively incorporate into its theology. And at the center of it all, on a throne that was not a throne, in a room that was not built to be a throne room, in a palace that did not exist when the device was found, in a planet that has been changed almost beyond recognition from the world where the Emperor began, sits what was once a man, and does the work that was never supposed to be his. As Section 13, the Emperor's origin and why it matters to the throne, understanding what the Emperor actually is, not just what he became, but what he was before the throne, before the heresy, before even the Great Crusade, matters for understanding why the throne's effect on him is as significant as it is. The imperial mythology holds that the Emperor was born on Terra more than 48,000 years ago in the ancient heartland of human civilization. This is, even within the fiction, mythology rather than history. No one who was alive at the Emperor's birth is still alive in the 41st millennium, and the Emperor has not seen fit to clarify his own biography in any detail that anyone could subsequently verify. What is established is that he is a perpetual, yet one of those extraordinary individuals whose soul persists through death and is reborn continuously. And the specific version of his origin that has the most textual support describes him as the collective reincarnation of the shamans, those early human spiritual practitioners who served as the interface between primitive humanity and the psychic realm during the age before civilization, who guided their communities through dangers that most of their contemporaries could not perceive and could not name. These shamans, as their era passed, and as the human psychic gift began to develop in ways that would eventually produce the modern psyche, faced a problem. They were dying, and when they died, their souls, powerful, experienced, and sensitive to the warp in ways that ordinary humans were not, were at risk of being consumed by the entities of the Imperium. The warp in that era was not what it would become after the birth of Slanesh and the other great chaos entities. But it was not safe. It was never safe for a human soul. And the shaman's souls were precisely the kind of valuable that drew predators. They chose a different kind of ending. Rather than dying and scattering and facing the warp alone, they gathered their essence into a collective and chose rebirth as a single, unified consciousness. All of them, all their experience, all their wisdom, all their psychic power, all the accumulated knowledge of generation upon generation of humanity's first and most capable spiritual practitioners, pooled into one soul and reborn. That was the Emperor, the new man, and the first of what humanity will eventually become, existing in an age before humanity was ready for what he represented. He has lived since then through hundreds or thousands of lifetimes, mortal lives and returned lives, deaths and rebirths, accumulating power and experience, and a perspective on the human condition that no individual mortal could achieve, because no individual mortal has the access to time that he has. This history matters for the throne because it changes what it means for the throne to be consuming him. When the throne degrades the Emperor's consciousness, burning away the human elements, the personal elements, the memories and feelings and individual connections, it is not merely erasing the history of one man. It is erasing the accumulated legacy of all those shamans. Everything that was preserved through their collective sacrifice at the beginning of the age of human psychic development. Everything that makes the Emperor, in the fullest sense, what he is, rather than merely what he can do. The machine that was supposed to serve the new man is eating him, piece by piece. The thing that makes him different from simply the most powerful psychic battery in the galaxy is what is being lost first. And here is the most painful irony buried in this history. The shamans sacrificed their individuality to create the Emperor. They pooled themselves into one consciousness rather than face the warp alone. They gave up what made them individually who they were in order to preserve what mattered most, in a form that could endure and grow. The Emperor on the throne, so until Earth is doing something that mirrors this, giving up what makes him individually who he is, consumed by the machine, maintaining the functions that matter without the context that makes the functions meaningful, as if the act that created him is being repeated on him from outside without his consent. Whether this is the Star Child, whether the pieces being burned away are truly being lost or are being gathered somewhere in the warp into something new, is the question that the law cannot yet answer. Section 14, the Astronomican in detail. The Astronomican deserves more attention than it usually gets in discussions of the throne, because it is the mechanism by which the throne's function propagates outward into the daily lives of every single person in the Imperium. The Astronomican is not simply a light, and it is a psychic beacon of extraordinary sophistication, projected outward from Terra across approximately 70,000 light-years, the extent of the Imperium's effective reach, more or less, though the edges are irregular and the signal degrades at distance. It exists within the warp as a fixed reference point, a stable signal in an environment defined by instability, something that the mutant navigators who guide Imperial vessels can perceive and use to triangulate their position. Without it, warp navigation as practiced by the Imperium is effectively impossible. Navigators can sense currents in the warp, can perceive the general movement of its tides, but they cannot determine where they are or where they are going without a fixed reference. The Astronomican is that fixed reference. It is the lighthouse, and the warp is the sea, and every ship that sails the warp is sailing by its light. The physical apparatus of the Astronomican is located not in the throne room itself, but in a separate structure, the Hollow Mountain, somewhere in the Himalayan range, connected to the throne complex by systems that are only partially understood by the people who operate them. The choir of the Astronomican, the 10,000 chosen psychers, who are connected to the beacon, are housed in the chamber of the astronomican within this structure. They are the ones who provide the raw psychic energy that the Emperor then shapes and directs into the beacon. The choir is maintained through the Adeptus Astronomica, an organization whose entire purpose is to identify, train, maintain, and eventually consume psychers in service of the beacon. The training process is not trivial. It is years of preparation, mental and psychic conditioning, the development of techniques for focusing psychic energy in the specific ways that the astronomican systems can use. An untrained psyker connected to the system is less useful than a trained one. The Adeptus Astronomica invests significant resources in each chosen, precisely because a trained chosen burns for longer and produces more reliably before burning out. But burn out they do. The connection to the astronomican systems is lethal in the medium term. The psychic energy is drawn from them faster than it can be replenished, their life force following their power out of them, until what is left is no longer capable of sustaining biological function. 1,000 die per day and die, and 1,000 more step into the chamber of the astronomican to take their place. The logistical tail of this process extends across the entire galaxy. The black ships that collect psychers from the populations of the Imperium's million worlds are one of the most visible expressions of imperial power that ordinary citizens ever encounter. Those dark vessels appearing in system after system, their presence a reminder that the Imperium's demands extend to the most fundamental aspects of human life. The psychers they collect are sorted at Terra, the majority fed to the throne's systems directly, a smaller number passing into the astronomican's service, a smaller number still surviving the soul-binding process that creates astropaths, the remainder handled in various other ways by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. I says the astronomican's range is not constant. It varies with the throne's condition, with the quality of the choir, with interference from warp storms and other psychic phenomena. During the Age of Apostasy, the catastrophic period of imperial civil war in the 36th and 37th millennia, the beacon's reliability was severely compromised. Ships were lost in numbers that even the Imperium, accustomed to high casualty rates, found alarming. Entire supply chains collapsed. Worlds that should have received relief fleets received instead the long silence of a galaxy that couldn't find them. The Great Rift has introduced a new category of problem for the astronomican. The tear in reality that now bisects the galaxy is not just a barrier. It is a source of psychic interference of extraordinary magnitude, a continuous eruption of warp energy into real space that disrupts everything in its vicinity, including the astronomican's signal. The half of the galaxy on the far side of the rift from Terra, the Imperium Nihilus, experiences the astronomican's signal as weakened, intermittent, and in the deepest reaches of the Nihilus, entirely absent. Navigation there relies on alternatives, smaller local psychic beacons, the navigator's own limited abilities to read the warp's currents, and methods that in quieter times would be considered dangerously experimental. This is happening now. This is the real consequence, in daily material terms, of the throne's deterioration and the warp's increasing hostility, not the abstract horror of imagining what happens if the throne fails, but the practical horror of regions of the Imperium where the lights are already dimming, where the beacon that was supposed to reach everywhere no longer reaches, where people are already navigating in a darkness that is only going to deepen. Section 15. The Keepers of the Secret. There is a layer of the Golden Throne's story that sits between the machine itself and the broader Imperium, and that layer is made of people. Specific people, in specific roles, carrying specific knowledge that almost no one else in the galaxy has access to. The Adeptus Custodes know more about the throne's actual condition than almost anyone else. They have stood watch in that chamber for 10,000 years. They have observed the changes, noted the accelerating degradation, or witnessed the increasing frequency of minor failures that the tech priests rush to address. The custodians do not have the technical knowledge of the mechanicum. They are not engineers, but they have something arguably more valuable in this situation. They have the observational record of 10,000 years of continuous witness. They know what the throne looked like and sounded and felt like 1,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago. They can perceive the gradient of the change in ways that no documentation of isolated technical readings could convey. The Fabricator General of Mars, whoever holds that position at any given time, sits on the High Lords of Terror and has access to the Mechanicum's technical assessments of the throne's condition. These assessments are prepared by the most senior tech priests involved in maintenance, translated through several layers of theological framing before they reach the political level, and then delivered in terms that are both accurate and carefully managed to prevent the kind of immediate panic that a straight technical summary would generate. The Lord Commander of the Imperium, Guilliman, in the current era, is told what the custodians and the Mechanicum determine that he needs to know. This is not everything. There are things the custodians know that they have not shared with Guilliman, partly because the information is classified at levels above the Lord Commander's clearance, and partly because some knowledge, once shared, creates obligations and pressures that those holding it have decided, across centuries of judgment, as are better held at the organizational level than distributed to individuals who must govern in real time. The Inquisition has elements that know things about the throne that even the custodians don't know, having investigated from the outside in ways that the custodian's guardianship role prevents them from pursuing. Inquisitor Erasmus Crowell, whose case files form the basis of a significant portion of the Vaults of Terror novel series, has assembled a picture of the throne's condition and the various attempts to address it that is in some ways more complete than what any single other institution possesses, precisely because he has been piecing it together from fragments that each institution considered classified from the others. And then there is Guilliman himself, as in what he knows from his interaction with the Emperor during his resurrection. He does not speak of this publicly. Whatever passed between him and his father in those moments, whatever the Emperor communicated, through whatever means, in those fraught and anguished seconds of communion between a dying God and a resurrected son, Guilliman carries it as a burden rather than a gift. His expression when the subject comes near it, in the accounts of those who serve close to him, is not that of a man who received hopeful news. This constellation of partial knowledge, this fragmented picture of the throne's reality distributed across institutions that do not fully communicate with each other, is characteristic of the Imperium at large. No one knows the whole truth. Everyone knows a piece. The pieces are kept from each other by classification, by institutional secrecy, by the genuine belief in some cases that sharing the information would cause more harm than withholding it, and by the bureaucratic inertia of an organization that has been managed this way for 10,000 years. The practical effect is that no coordinated response to the throne's failure has ever been possible. Each institution responds to its piece of the problem with its own tools and its own authority, without full knowledge of what the other institutions know or what they are doing. Vadrian goes to find Morvain without knowing what the Mechanicum's most recent internal assessments concluded. The Mechanicum performs its repairs without full access to the custodian's observational record. What the Inquisition investigates the conspiracies around the throne without full access to either. The throne is failing, and the response to its failure is as fragmented and uncoordinated as the Imperium's response to everything else. This is not a design flaw. It is a design feature, in the sense that the Imperium was never designed at all. It was improvised, the same way the throne was improvised, out of the wreckage of something better that was destroyed before it could be completed. Section 16. The irony of the imperial faith. The greatest irony of the Golden Throne is this: the Emperor never wanted to be worshipped. This requires some emphasis, because the disconnect between what the Emperor wanted and what the Imperium became is so total that it can be difficult to hold both in mind at the same time. The Emperor's ideology, during the Great Crusade, was called the Imperial Truth. It was explicit, deliberate, and enforced. The Imperial Truth held that there were no gods, no supernatural entities worthy of worship. no spiritual dimensions to human existence that could not be explained through the rational investigation of reality. The chaos gods existed. The emperor knew this. But they were not gods in any meaningful theological sense. They were psychic entities that fed on human emotion and grew stronger through human belief and worship. Calling them gods and worshipping them was the most dangerous thing a human being could do. It made them more real, more powerful, more able to act in the material world. The logical corollary of this, which the emperor did not spell out quite so directly, but which follows immediately from it, is that the emperor himself could not be treated as a god. The moment his followers began worshipping him as a divine figure, the moment the imperial church started doing what the imperial church currently does, the prayers, the rituals, the saints, the litanies, all of it, they would be doing the same thing to the emperor that the worshippers of chaos do to the chaos gods. They would be feeding him into the warp as a psychic entity, shaping him through collective belief into something he never chose to be. The ecclesiarchy, the massive church that now governs the spiritual life of hundreds of billions of people across the Imperium, is exactly what the emperor spent the Great Crusade trying to prevent. His explicit suppression of the word-bearers' attempts to build a religious cult around him, the razing of the shrine city of Monarchia, the humiliation of the word-bearers' legion for having done precisely what he told them not to do. All of this was the emperor trying, with the authority of absolute power, to stop the thing that has now happened. He failed. Or rather, he was defeated by the events of the heresy before he could complete the project, and in his absence, the thing he had prevented began to grow. Within a few generations of the emperor's internment, the religion of the God Emperor was well established. By the 38th millennium, it was effectively the state religion of the entire Imperium, its tenets mandatory, deviation from it prosecuted by agencies with the legal authority to execute. The throne room that now exists, with its atmosphere of sacred reverence and its rituals of maintenance and its carefully managed access, and the theological framework around every aspect of the emperor's existence. This is not what the emperor asked for. This is the thing he spent decades trying to prevent, made permanent and galaxy-spanning by the events of the very heresy that was supposed to be the argument for why he was right. And the people who built this religion, who maintain it, who use it to govern hundreds of billions of lives, they are, in their way, trying to protect something that matters. The faith in the emperor does something. It provides psychic energy of a kind that strengthens the emperor's presence in the warp. It provides solidarity and shared identity across a civilization that would otherwise be impossibly fragmented. And it gives people a reason to fight, to sacrifice, to endure, that rational self-interest alone cannot consistently provide. It is not nothing. The emperor himself, in what little indirect communication the law allows him, does not seem to want the religion destroyed, even though he never wanted it built. But it is built on something the emperor explicitly rejected, and it surrounds the throne, which is already a desperate improvisation built on a failed dream, with a further layer of sacred unmodifiability that makes the already impossibly difficult task of actually fixing the situation even harder. The Golden Throne is sustained by a faith the emperor never wanted, maintained by techniques he never designed, serving purposes he never intended, and the civilization around it worships him for it. The prayers offered to the Golden Throne, as across 1,000,000 worlds, reach something that may not be the emperor in any personal sense anymore, that was never supposed to be what it became, that burns 3.5 billion human souls per century to perform functions it was never built for, and that is quietly, slowly, irrevocably failing. The emperor protects. He really might. He really might be protecting, in whatever way remains available to a mind in his situation, with whatever consciousness remains after 10,000 years of this. The miracle accounts suggest something still directs those outcomes. The astronomican suggests something still lights the way. But the protection was supposed to be different. The protection was supposed to be freedom from the warp, freedom from the necessity of sacrifice, freedom from the hunger of the dark things that wait in the immaterium. The protection was supposed to be the webway, open and complete, and carrying humanity between the stars without the payment of a single life. That protection failed before it could be given. What replaced it is vast and real, and has kept the species alive for 10,000 years. But it is not what he wanted to give, and that, in the end, is the truest and most heartbreaking truth of the Golden Throne. Section 17. The Connections, the Law, invites you to make. The Golden Throne is not alone in the law as a piece of ancient, incomprehensible, alien technology that has been repurposed by desperate humans in ways its original designers never imagined. The setting is full of them. Standard template constructs, those databases of human knowledge from the Dark Age, whose partial fragments drive the Mechanicum's relic hunts. The pylons of the Necrons, whose function as warp suppressors was only partially understood even by the Necrons who built them. The webway itself, an inheritance that the Aeldari mastered but did not create, whose original designers left no documentation of its full design. The Imperium exists inside technology it does not understand, performing rituals around machines it cannot replicate, hoping the gap between the ritual and the function is not so wide that it stops working before someone figures out what the function actually is. This is not unique to the Golden Throne. It is the condition of the entire civilization. But the Golden Throne is the most important instance of this condition, because it is the load-bearing structure on which everything else rests. And every other piece of poorly understood technology that the Imperium depends on exists in a context where the throne is functioning. The astronomican is working. Ships can navigate. Forces can be concentrated. Problems can be responded to. Remove the throne from the equation, and every other piece of technology becomes irrelevant, because the civilization that uses them ceases to be a coherent civilization. There is a reading of the setting in which everything that happens in the 41st millennium, every war, every crusade, every political crisis, every demonic incursion, every Xenos threat, is a side effect of the throne's failure. Not in the sense that the throne's failure causes these events directly, but in the sense that the throne's failure is the gravity well that everything orbits. The Chaos Gods press harder because they sense the weakening. The Necrons awake into a galaxy where the Imperium is distracted and overstretched. The Tyranids approach a galaxy whose defenses are fragmenting. The Great Rift opens partly because the psychic defenses that have held for millennia are no longer as strong as they were. Everything connects to the throne. In this reading, the Imperium in the 41st millennium is not a civilization going through the difficult events of a particular period in its history. It is a patient whose underlying condition has been deteriorating for 10,000 years. And the individual crises, the wars, the heresies, the Xenos invasions, are symptoms of that deterioration rather than independent problems. Treat the underlying condition and the symptoms become manageable. You fail to treat it, and no amount of symptom management changes the trajectory. This is why the Golden Throne matters in a way that goes beyond lore interest or faction discussion. It is the axis on which the setting turns. The question of whether it can be fixed, and how, and what happens if it cannot be, is not a narrative subplot. It is the central question. Everything else in the 41st millennium is happening in its shadow. Section 18. The Black Ships and the Human Cost in full detail. The Black Ships. Those vast, dark vessels that travel the Imperium's shipping lanes on a circuit that never ends. Visiting world after world, collecting what the Imperium euphemistically calls the Psyker tithe. Let us talk about what this actually looks like. Because the abstraction of 3.5 billion souls over 10,000 years needs to be grounded in something more immediate to be truly understood. On any given world in the Imperium, a hive city, an agri world, a feudal world, A forge world, it does not matter. Psychers are identified by various means, sometimes by the Inquisition directly, sometimes by local authorities, who are legally required to report them, sometimes by the psycher's own inability to control their gifts, the strange things that happen around them, the incidents that draw attention, and sometimes, in the worst cases, by the wake of destruction that an uncontrolled psyker leaves behind, the demonic possessions, the warp breaches, the events that cost many lives before the psyker is identified and contained. When the black ships come, yet the identified psychers are handed over. The process is not gentle. The black ships are not hospitals or schools or transit vessels in any comfortable sense. They are collection vessels, and their purpose is efficiency of transport rather than comfort of occupants. The psychers collected, many of them young, many of them terrified, many of them with no context for what is happening to them beyond the knowledge that the black ships take people and the people do not come back, are processed, assessed, and transported to Terra. At Terra, they are sorted. The most controlled, most capable, most stable of them may survive long enough to be considered for soul-binding as astropaths, which extends their lives and gives them purpose within the Imperium's communication networks. A smaller number pass into the service of the Adeptus Astronomica, as where they will be trained and eventually connected to the astronomican systems. The majority are fed directly to the throne. They are not there long. The psychic drain is fast and total, leaving nothing behind that could continue. What they experience during this process, whether there is any awareness in those final moments, any perception of the Emperor or the machine or anything at all, is not something the Imperial theology explores with much rigor, because the answer might be uncomfortable. The black ships visit every world. There is no exemption for hardship, for small populations, for worlds already giving everything they have in other forms of tithe. The psyker tithe is separate from other Imperial obligations, collected by a separate agency, overseen by a different part of the Imperial hierarchy. It is as routine, in the administrative sense, as any other form of taxation. And yet what it taxes is the psychic potential of the species. Psychers, in the broader arc of the setting, are not anomalies to be controlled and disposed of. They are the leading edge of humanity's evolution, the vanguard of what the species is becoming. The Emperor himself was a psyker of extraordinary magnitude. The Primarchs were fundamentally psychic beings, even the ones who did not use their gifts in obvious ways. The trajectory of the species, in the Emperor's vision, was toward a humanity that had fully embraced its psychic nature and could navigate the warp and interact with the immaterium with skill and safety rather than fear and suppression. The black ships are burning that future. They are consuming the most psychically gifted members of each generation, destroying the individuals who would, in a different version of the Imperium, be the ones developing the skills and the knowledge and the techniques that would allow humanity to engage with its psychic nature safely. They are doing this to fuel a machine that was supposed to make this sacrifice unnecessary. The sacrifice is perpetuating the conditions that make the sacrifice necessary. This is one of the crueler loops in the 41st millennium, and there are many cruel loops. The throne was supposed to enable the end of the psyker sacrifice. The psyker sacrifice now sustains the throne. Breaking the loop requires fixing the throne. Fixing the throne requires knowledge and capability that the throne's existence has made it harder to develop. And the species cannot evolve toward the safe management of its psychic gifts because the most gifted members of each generation are being consumed before they can learn, teach, or develop anything. The Emperor understood this. He called the psyker sacrifice a temporary measure that would end as soon as the webway project was complete. He was not wrong about the temporary part. It was supposed to be temporary. He was tragically wrong about the complete part. Section 19. The galaxy's reaction to the throne's weakness. The other intelligent species of the galaxy are not unaware of the Golden Throne's significance or its deterioration. The Aeldari, in all their forms, Craftworld, Drukhari, Harlequins, Inari, have a relationship to the throne that is complicated by the fact that it is, by some accounts, built from technology related to their own heritage and is certainly built to interface with a system, the webway, that they regard as their own. The craft world Aldari, who can perceive the psychic state of the galaxy through the infinity circuits and the visions of their seers, are aware that the Emperor's light in the warp, which has burned for 10,000 years, is changing, growing in some ways and weakening in others. What it means, for them as well as for humanity, is something their greatest farseers have been modeling for centuries. The Necrons, those ancient metallic beings who predate the Eldari, who fought the first great war against the Old Ones, and whose history has an arguable connection to the technology of the throne itself through the Old One's legacy. They are awakening. Their silent king, Sarek, has returned to lead them in a manner that has not been seen since before the Great Sleep. His concern with the Tyrannid threat and his willingness to consider cooperation with other species in facing it represents a strategic flexibility that the Necrons have not historically displayed. Whether he knows about the Golden Throne's condition, and if so, what he intends to do about it, is one of the more tantalizing unresolved threads in current lore. The Tyrannids, those vast galaxy-spanning hive fleets that consume all biological material they encounter, are not intelligent in the individual sense, but the hive mind that coordinates them is capable of perceiving the psychic state of a galaxy-sized region of space. The shadow in the warp, that psychic phenomenon produced by large Tyrannid concentrations, or disrupts the astronomican signal in its vicinity. Whether this is deliberate interference with the throne's function or simply a side effect of the hive mind's psychic presence is not clear, but the timing of the major hive fleet incursions, which have accelerated significantly in the last millennium, does not feel unrelated to the throne's deterioration. The Chaos Gods, of course, have never been unaware. They have been pushing against the throne's barriers since the beginning. The warp manifestations, the demon incursions, the sponsorship of various heretic Astartes warbands and black crusades and demonic invasions, all of it can be read, at some level, as the Chaos Gods testing the defenses of something that is slowly becoming less defended. Each failed black crusade, each driven-back demon incursion, is not necessarily a defeat for chaos. It is data, information about the current state of the barriers, the current strength of the seal, the current condition of what is holding the door shut. They are patient. They are not capable of not being patient. They will be there when the door opens, however long it takes. The orcs, that vast, sprawling, war-loving species of greenskins whose existence is partially a creation of the Old Ones, are, individually, entirely unaware of the Golden Throne and entirely uninterested in its significance. But the War phenomenon, the psychic field generated by large orc gatherings, does interact with the warp in ways that complicate the broader psychic environment of the regions it touches. During the War of the Beast, that ancient conflict that nearly reached terror, the orc forces actually got close enough that the question of whether the throne would be defended became uncomfortably relevant. The war was won. But it illustrated that the physical approaches to terror itself are not theoretical threats. Everyone is watching. Everyone with the capacity to perceive the psychic state of the galaxy can see that something that has burned steadily for 10,000 years is burning differently now. Some of them want to protect it. Some of them want to exploit its weakening. Some of them, the Eldari perhaps, or certain elements of the Necrons, might want something more complicated than either protection or exploitation. Something that involves the throne's future in ways that no current inhabitant of the Imperium has fully anticipated. Section 20. The question that remains. We have covered a great deal of ground tonight. The device in the desert and its unknown builders, the Emperor's dream of the webway and the extraordinary ambition behind it, Magnus's shattering of that dream through an act of love, the desperate improvisation of the siege and the modification of the throne into something it was never designed to be, 10,000 years of psychic labor, psycho-sacrifice, and slow mechanical deterioration, the quest for solutions that may not exist, the Star Child and the possibility that the throne's ending is not an ending, the iron faith that built itself around a dying machine and a dying god who never asked for it. And we have come to the question that the setting cannot answer, the one that Games Workshop is never quite going to resolve, because resolving it would change what the setting is. Can it be fixed? And if it cannot be fixed, what happens next? I do not think these questions are unanswerable in principle. Within the fiction, they have answers. The throne either gets fixed or it does not. The emperor either survives or he does not. The Imperium either endures or it collapses. These are binary outcomes, even if the paths to them are complex. What the setting achieves, by keeping the resolution perpetually deferred, is something that might be more valuable than any single answer. It keeps the tension alive, as it keeps every event in the 41st millennium resonating against this backdrop. Every battle matters a little more because the side fighting it is fighting in the shadow of a clock. Every sacrifice matters a little more because you can trace the line from any individual act of heroism back to the larger calculus of whether humanity continues or not. Every piece of lore has weight because it exists in a setting where the weight is real, where things are genuinely at risk, where the civilization you are playing out your stories in might not be there in a century. The Golden Throne is the setting's heartbeat. Slow, irregular, sometimes skipping, never quite certain to continue. And the darkness of the 41st millennium is defined by the knowledge held by the characters who matter most and felt at a gut level by the audience, that one day that heartbeat will stop. What happens when it stops? Nobody knows. Not the characters, not the designers, not quite us, not yet. And that truly is everything I can tell you about the Golden Throne tonight. A machine built by unknown hands for unknown purposes, found by the most extraordinary human being in history, repurposed out of necessity into something it was never designed to be, maintained by people who cannot understand it, failing in ways that cannot be repaired, and holding up the entire weight of human civilization on its corroded, inscrutable, slowly collapsing frame. If you found something in this tonight, a new understanding, a thread you want to follow, a moment where the darkness of this setting became a little more three-dimensional and a little more real, then please hit that like button, as it costs nothing and means more than you might expect for a channel like this one, where the goal is depth over speed, atmosphere over noise. Subscribe if this is the kind of content you want more of. Q. On 40,000 goes slow and goes deep into every corner of this setting that deserves the attention. We have barely scratched the surface of what is here. The Horus heresy in full, the nature of chaos, and why the four ruinous powers are different in the ways they are, the Primarchs who have returned and those who have not, and what their absence means, the Aeldari and the long defeat they have been living for 10,000 years, the Necrons and the cold patience of beings who have been asleep longer than humanity has been a species. Every thread connects to every other thread. The throne connects to everything, and everything is worth knowing. I will be here when you come back. Take care of yourselves. And remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But sometimes, there is also a light. Faint, distant, burning through an impossible darkness. And somewhere in a room beneath a mountain, something holds it steady. For now. Appendix. Things left unsaid, and the broader web of consequences. There are threads in the Golden Throne story that I have touched on, but not fully pulled, and in the interest of making this as complete as it should be, let me spend some time on a few of them. The Talisman of Seven Hammers. This is one of the least discussed but most consequential pieces of Golden Throne lore. When the Siege of Terror was at its height, and the situation beneath the Imperial Palace was most desperate, and the Emperor directed the Primarch Vulcan, he who returns, the immortal Primarch of the Salamanders, one of the rare perpetuals among the Emperor's sons, to enter the throne room and install a device called the Talisman of Seven Hammers. The Emperor guided him through the installation directly, communicating from the throne in the midst of battle. The Talisman of Seven Hammers is described as a failsafe, a device designed to trigger under specific conditions and to take an action that the lore is deliberately coy about describing precisely. The most common interpretation, and one that has significant textual support, is that the talisman is designed to destroy the Golden Throne if certain conditions are met, to detonate it catastrophically, at preventing the throne from falling into enemy hands or from being used in ways that the Emperor cannot accept. The fact that this device was installed tells you something important about how the Emperor thought about the throne. He did not build it to be permanent. He did not install the talisman as an afterthought. He directed its installation at one of the most critical moments in human history, when he had many other things to think about, because he considered the question of what happens if the throne fails in the wrong way, if it falls to chaos, if it is used against its purpose, if it becomes an instrument of the enemy rather than a bulwark against them, to be important enough to address even in the middle of everything else. The talisman may still be there. Its current status, whether it has been maintained, whether it is still functional after 10,000 years, whether anyone in the current Imperium knows about it, and if so, who, is not clear from the sources available. But its existence is a reminder that the Emperor always thought about contingencies. He always planned for the possibility that his plans would fail. And his contingency for the Golden Throne was not continued existence at all costs. It was a controlled ending if the alternative was something worse. The question of whether the throne's slow failure might eventually trigger the talisman, or whether the talisman's trigger conditions are specific enough that gradual deterioration doesn't qualify, is one that nobody in the current Imperium seems to be asking loudly enough. Then there is the matter of the Primarch Jagatai Khan, who disappeared into the webway in pursuit of Drakari raiders after the heresy. He is believed to still be alive, somewhere in the webway's endless passages. The connection to the Golden Throne is indirect, but intriguing. The Khan, if he is alive and if he could be found, represents a source of knowledge about the webway from the inside that no one currently alive possesses. What a Primarch's mind might have learned about the labyrinthine dimension in 10,000 years of moving through it is something the Imperium can only speculate about. And then there is Layman Russ, the Space Wolves Primarch, who departed into the Eye of Terror with a declaration that he would return for what is called the Wolf Time, that final prophesied battle at the end of things. Well, whether the Wolf Time is connected to the throne's failure is not stated directly, but feels implied. If there is an event coming that the Space Wolves' oldest prophecies recognized as the moment Russ would return, and if the throne's failure is the most catastrophic thing on the Imperium's horizon, the connection seems likely to be more than coincidence. The Lionel Johnson has returned, woken from his long sleep on the rock by the events of the Imperium Nihilus. He is the first of the Loyalist Primarchs to return in anything like full capacity. His first actions have been concerned with the Unforgiven, the Dark Angels and their successor chapters, and the perpetual hunt for the fallen. But his presence, his capabilities, and his knowledge of the Emperor from the pre-heresy era make him a potential figure in whatever response to the throne's situation eventually materializes. The galaxy is not simply waiting for the throne to fail. The players are assembling. The pieces that were scattered by the heresy and the 10,000 years after it are coming back together in ways that feel, from within the fiction, like preparation. For what? The lore maintains its characteristic refusal to answer directly. But the shape of what is coming feels like it has something to do with the question that has been deferred for 10,000 years. What happens when the clock runs out? Maybe the answer to that question is already being built, piece by piece. One in the actions of returning Primarchs and searching custodians and ancient machines, rediscovered on lost Forge worlds and secret knowledge held by a being who has had 10,000 years to think. Not yet, but one day. The Golden Throne is not just lore. It is a clock. It is a promise. It is a question posed at the beginning of the setting and still unanswered. It is the thing that makes everything else matter, because everything else happens in its shadow, under the knowledge that the shadow has an ending, and that ending is coming, and nobody knows exactly when. That is what I love about this setting, and that is what I wanted to share with you tonight. If you are still here after all of this, genuinely, thank you. This is the kind of content that takes a long time to research and longer to write, and even longer to say properly. If it gave you something, understanding or atmosphere, or just the comfortable weight of a long story about something that matters, then like and subscribe. Come back. There is so much more. Take care of yourselves. This was Q on 40,000. Until next time, one final thought. The human scale of an inhuman story. Before we end entirely, I want to do something that I think the lore of the Golden Throne needs and rarely gets. I want to bring it down to the human scale. We have talked about billions of souls and 10,000 years and galaxy-spanning consequences. These numbers are true and they matter, but they are also numbers that the human mind struggles to fully process, because we did not evolve to hold billions in our heads. We evolved to hold about 150 people, our community, the faces and names and stories of the individuals who make up our immediate world. So let us think about the Golden Throne in terms of the individual. Somewhere, right now, within the fiction of the setting, a child is being born on a planet somewhere in the Imperium who will turn out to be a psyker. She does not know this yet. Her parents do not know this yet. She is simply a child with a family, with a community around her, with the ordinary future that most children have. The expectation of growth and learning and love, and eventually, perhaps, children of her own. In a decade or 2 or 3, she will begin to notice things. Dreams that seem to come true. A sense of what people are feeling before they speak. Small events that correlate with her emotional states in ways she cannot explain. She will probably be frightened. Her family will probably be frightened. In many communities in the Imperium, fear leads to reports. Reports lead to the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica leads to the black ships. She will never return home. Whatever her potential was, whatever she might have learned, whatever she might have discovered, whatever she might have given the world she lived on, that will not happen. She will be taken to Terra, assessed, processed, and connected to the systems of the throne or the astronomican. She will burn. She is one of the 3.5 billion. She is one of the 1,000 per day in the current era, or the 4,000 per day as the throne's demands increase. She is real, within the fiction, with a name and a face and a history that nobody will record and nobody will remember. And somewhere in the dark beneath the Imperial Palace, the machine that will consume her was found in a desert before history began, modified in haste at the end of the worst war in human history, and has been slowly failing for 10,000 years. She is burning because the Webway project was destroyed, because Magnus loved his father, because Tzinch saw an opportunity, because the Horus heresy happened, because the Emperor was wounded in a way that could not be healed, because the Mechanicum modified a device they did not understand, because the modifications have been deteriorating ever since, because nobody can fix what they cannot understand, because the dream died, and what replaced it costs this. There is no villain in this chain of causation. And there is only the accumulation of decisions made by beings trying to do what they thought was right, in circumstances that did not allow for good outcomes, building on each other until the result was something none of them would have chosen. That is what tragedy is. Not the work of villains, the work of time and circumstance, and the terrible gap between intentions and consequences. The Golden Throne is the most complete tragic object in science fiction and fantasy that I have encountered in my years of engaging with this setting. It is vast, it is old, it is failing, and it is, at its heart, the story of a dream that was supposed to free people and became instead the thing that consumes them. Hold that in your heart, the next time you think about the 41st millennium. The darkness is dark for reasons. The reasons are old and deeply human. And somewhere in a machine that nobody fully understands, something holds on for all of them.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.